Once upon a quiet morning, in a small coastal village, the sun rose slowly over the sea, painting the sky with warm, golden colors. The waves lapped gently against the wooden boats anchored near the shore. Everything felt peaceful. Everything felt still. Thomas, a kind-hearted fisherman, with silvering hair and gentle eyes, opened the door of his little cottage by the sea. His loyal companion, Gold, a golden retriever with the softest fur and the calmest eyes, greeted him with a wagging tail. Together, they stepped outside to greet the day. The breeze was soft, the salt air smelled fresh, and the world seemed to whisper, "Take it slow." It was a special day. Though Thomas hadn't said it out loud, today was his birthday. But he didn't need anything grand. No big celebrations, no loud parties. Just the ocean, the sky, his boat, and Gold. That was enough for him. After a simple breakfast of warm bread and honey, Thomas packed his small fishing boat. Gold jumped in beside him, curling up as he always did. The boat rocked gently, and they set off into the still blue sea. Hours passed slowly. The waves were gentle, like the rhythm of a lullaby. Seagulls glided in the sky, casting soft shadows on the water. Thomas leaned back in the boat, letting the sun warm his skin. He cast his line, but he wasn't in a hurry. He wasn't fishing for a feast, just enjoying the peace. Gold rested his head on Thomas's knee, eyes half closed. Time moved differently on the water. Slower, softer, quieter. After a few hours, Thomas caught a few small fish, just enough for dinner. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, they made their way back to shore. The boat slid gently onto the sand. The sky had turned to shades of lavender and rose. That evening, Thomas lit a small fire on the beach. It crackled softly, casting a warm glow on the sand. Above, the full moon was rising. Big, bright, gentle. The stars twinkled like tiny lanterns, and the sound of the waves was like the heartbeat of the world. Gold lay beside the fire, paws stretched out, completely at peace. Thomas pulled out a small wooden box. Inside was a tiny cake, baked by his neighbor, Mrs. Alden, who never forgot a birthday. It smelled of cinnamon and apples. He smiled, touched by her kindness. He placed a single candle on it. He didn't light it. He didn't need to. Instead, he closed his eyes and made a quiet wish. He wished for more simple days like this one. More moonlit nights, more mornings with Gold, more peace, just more of this. As he opened his eyes, the firelight flickered in Gold's golden fur. The moon reflected in the dog's eyes, and Thomas chuckled softly. "Well, old friend," he said, "another year older, and I wouldn't change a thing." The waves whispered along the shore. The fire crackled gently. A cool breeze danced across the sand, carrying the scent of sea and smoke. Thomas leaned back on a log, pulling a soft blanket over his shoulders. Gold nestled close. Together, they stared up at the moon, letting the stillness of the night wrap around them like a warm hug. There was no rush, no noise, just silence, just the sea, just the stars. Thomas began to hum a tune his father used to sing, a lullaby from long ago. The melody drifted into the night air, slow and sweet. And then, nothing more. Just the sound of waves, the warmth of the fire, the light of the moon, and the comfort of knowing that sometimes the simplest days are the most beautiful gifts of all. It was another quiet morning in the seaside village. The sea breathed in and out calmly. The sky was painted in soft pastels, lavender, blue, and a hint of peach. A breeze danced through the tall grass, and the world seemed to whisper, "Be still." Thomas, the gentle fisherman with kind eyes and a heart full of calm, stood by his boat. Beside him, Gold, his loyal golden retriever, sat quietly, tail swaying with the breeze. But this day was different. Today, they were expecting someone. A boy. His name was Eli, 11 years old. Curious eyes, hands that fidgeted with excitement. He had never been on a boat before, and he had never caught a fish. But he wanted to learn. Thomas remembered the first time he learned. He was not much older than Eli. As the sun rose higher, Eli came walking down the path with his mother. She waved from afar and watched her son run the last few steps. Thomas greeted him with a smile. Gold gave a happy bark, and trotted over to sniff the new visitor. "Ready?" Thomas asked softly. Eli nodded. "I think so." "Good," said Thomas, "because the sea is ready too." They pushed off together, the little wooden boat gliding over the smooth surface of the morning water. Gold jumped in and settled at the front like a captain watching over his crew. The boat rocked gently. The oars creaked softly, the water whispered below. Eli leaned over the edge, watching his reflection dance in the ripples. "It's so quiet," he said. "That's the first rule of the sea," Thomas replied. "It likes silence. It speaks in silence. You just have to listen." They drifted farther from shore. The village disappeared behind them. Only the sky, the sea, and the soft sounds of nature remained. Thomas showed Eli how to hold the fishing rod, how to cast the line with care, how to wait without needing to fill the space with words. Eli tried. His first cast made a splash. Gold barked, amused. They all laughed. "Try again," Thomas said gently. And Eli did again and again, until finally, the line danced. Thomas leaned forward. "Steady now, not too fast." Eli's hands shook slightly, but he focused. The reel turned slowly, and there, rising from the sea, was a small silver fish, shining in the sunlight like a secret. Eli's eyes lit up. "I did it," Thomas smiled. "Yes, you did." Gold barked in celebration. They gently returned the fish to the water, watching it swim away with a flash of its tail. "Will it come back?" Eli asked. "Maybe," Thomas said. "Or maybe it'll tell others about you." Eli grinned. They spent the rest of the morning floating in silence, catching small fish, talking softly, sharing stories. Thomas told him about tides and stars, about the wind and its moods, about listening to the sea. When the sun began to dip, they returned to shore. Thomas lit a small fire by the beach, just like he always did. Eli sat wrapped in a blanket, holding a mug of warm tea sweetened with honey. Gold curled up beside them, tail flicking in the sand. The moon rose slow and full. The sky turned deep blue, and the first stars blinked awake. Eli looked up. "This was the best day ever." Thomas nodded. "Sometimes the best days are the quiet ones." The fire crackled softly. The waves whispered along the shore. Gold sighed, content. Thomas handed Eli a small wooden token. Carved on it was a fish, simple and smooth. "Your first catch," he said. "To remember." Eli held it close. "Thank you." They sat there, watching the moon rise higher, wrapped in stillness. And as sleep gently came to the boy's eyes, Thomas whispered, "The sea will always remember you, and it will always welcome you back." The fire flickered low. The night wrapped around them like a blanket. And somewhere in the gentle waves, the fish swam beneath the moonlight, free and shining. The morning sun rose slowly over the sleepy coastal village. Its golden light shimmered on the sea like soft silk. The waves whispered as they met the shore, and the breeze carried the scent of salt and seaweed through the air. Everything was calm. Everything was still. Inside a little wooden cottage by the shore, Thomas woke to the sound of the gulls calling above. He stretched slowly and smiled, remembering what day it was. Today was the day of the annual harbor fishing gathering, a gentle competition held once a year by the villagers. It wasn't a fierce contest. There were no prizes of gold or fame. It was more of a tradition, a friendly event where neighbors came together, shared food, cast their lines, and celebrated the sea. Gold, the golden retriever with warm eyes and a steady soul, stood by the door, tail wagging softly. He knew something special was happening. Thomas patted his head. "Ready for the day, old friend?" Gold gave a soft bark and followed him outside, where the early light sparkled on the waves. They made their way to the village dock. A few neighbors were already gathered. Mrs. Alden with her wide straw hat, young Eli from the last story with a wooden rod in hand, and Captain Josiah, the old sailor with a beard like sea foam. Everyone greeted Thomas warmly. "You joining us this year?" asked Josiah. Thomas nodded gently. "Just for fun." He looked out at the sea. It was calm, like glass. The kind of sea that invited you to drift and dream. Each fisherman would take their small boat out alone, or with a companion like a dog or a child. The rule was simple. Return by sunset with your best story and the longest fish. But no one really cared who won. It was about being out there, listening, waiting, drifting. Thomas and Gold stepped into their boat, the familiar creak of wood beneath their feet. With one soft push, they drifted away from the dock, gliding over the silver water. Gold sat at the front, nose in the wind. Thomas cast his line slowly. And so, the day began. The hours passed gently. The sun rose higher. The sea rocked them softly. Gold snoozed beneath Thomas's feet, occasionally opening one eye to check for excitement. From time to time, Thomas caught a fish. Not too big, not too small. He measured them, whispered, "Maybe later," and let them go. He wasn't in a hurry. He was never in a hurry. Clouds passed like lazy ships overhead. A pelican flew low, skimming the water. Somewhere far off, a bell on a buoy rang once, and then silence again. Thomas sipped tea from a small thermos. Gold yawned and laid his head on Thomas's boot. Then there was a tug. Not sharp, not sudden. Just a quiet, steady pull. Thomas smiled. "Shall we see what the sea has for us today?" He reeled slowly, gently. The water bubbled and shimmered. Up came a silver fish, long and lean, with blue along its back. It wasn't enormous, but it was graceful. Elegant. Thomas whispered to it. "Thank you." Gold gave a happy wag of his tail, as if in approval. They placed the fish in a small bucket, covered it with cool seawater, and began the slow journey back. By the time they reached the shore, the sun was low in the sky. The other villagers had returned, their boats bobbing by the dock. Laughter filled the air. People shared their catches. Some told tall tales of the one that got away. Children ran barefoot through the sand, and the fire pits were lit with gentle flames. Thomas stepped onto the sand, Gold at his side, and held up the silverfish. "Oh," said Mrs. Alden, clapping her hands. "That one's beautiful." "Elegant," agreed Captain Josiah. "But what's the story?" asked Eli, eyes bright. Thomas thought for a moment, and then he smiled. He told them about the quiet pull, the shimmering scales, the moment of stillness when the fish surfaced like a gift from the deep. No struggle, no noise, just a connection between sea and soul. When he finished, there was a soft pause. Even the fire seemed to crackle a little quieter. "Well then," said Josiah, tipping his cap, "I think we have ourselves a winner. Not for the biggest fish, but for the finest story." The villagers laughed and applauded gently. Gold barked once, tail wagging proudly. They shared food by the fire, grilled fish, fresh bread, and slices of lemon pie. Thomas and Gold sat on a driftwood log, wrapped in a blanket of evening air and glowing firelight. The moon rose, round and full once again, casting silver light on the waves. Thomas leaned back, hands behind his head, and whispered to Gold, "We didn't come to win. We came to listen." Gold gave a soft sigh of agreement. The waves whispered along the shore. The stars blinked quietly above. And another peaceful day faded into the calm of night, wrapped in silence, stories, and the song of the sea. The sun had not yet risen. The sky was still a soft indigo, touched by the promise of dawn. Stars lingered above like sleepy lanterns. The sea, ever calm, stretched out endlessly, quiet and waiting. Inside the cozy seaside cottage, Thomas stood at the window, sipping warm tea from a clay mug. Gold, his golden retriever and dearest companion, sat at his feet, already awake, already listening. Today was different. Today, they would sail farther than usual, much farther. Once a season, when the tides were just right and the moon had danced full and slow, the fishermen of the village gathered together. Not for competition, not for celebration, but for something older, a journey. They called it the long drift, a tradition handed down by quiet voices in calm waters. It was not about how many fish you caught. It was about going farther, about trusting the sea, about seeing what lay beyond the familiar cove, where the waves were deeper and the sky stretched wider. Thomas hadn't joined in years, but this time, something inside him whispered, "Go." And so, as the light of morning crept over the horizon, he and Gold made their way to the dock, where 3 other boats waited. each one a friend. There was Captain Josiah, old but strong, with his white beard tied in 2 knots. There was Mira, the quiet fisherwoman with the red scarf and sharp eyes that saw dolphins before anyone else did. And there was young Eli, now a bit taller, a bit braver, standing proudly beside a borrowed boat, grinning wide. They all nodded to one another. No words were needed. Together the boats pushed off. One by one they drifted from the shore, sails raised like soft wings, catching the morning wind. The journey began in stillness. The sea was smooth like glass. Gold stood at the front of the boat, nose in the wind, eyes calm. His fur danced in the breeze. Thomas adjusted the sail, letting the boat glide alongside the others, all heading toward the far line where sea met sky. Hours passed. They left behind the coastline. The village became a dot, then disappeared entirely. Now it was only water, sky, and the occasional cry of a distant seabird. Thomas breathed deeply. The air was cooler here, lighter, the kind of air that makes your thoughts slow down and your heart feel wide. He cast his line, not expecting much. He wasn't here for the fish. Gold laid down beside the mast, head resting on Thomas's boot. Now and then they spoke to the others from across the waves. Josiah told an old story about a flying fish that once landed in his lap. Mira pointed at a school of silver fish darting beneath the surface, moving like moonlight in water. Eli shouted with joy every time he felt a tug on his line, his laughter echoing over the sea like a bell. And Thomas just smiled. By midday, clouds drifted slowly overhead, casting shadows that danced on the waves. They shared food from their baskets, bread, cheese, apples. The sea rocked them gently, like a cradle. Gold munched on a biscuit. Thomas fed him bits of fish jerky, and they watched the sails ripple in the breeze. Then came the dolphins. First, just one, then 2, then 5, then a whole pod, leaping in and out of the water beside the boats, gliding and spinning with joy. Everyone stood silently, watching the graceful dance. Thomas laughed quietly. Even the sea wants to play today. The dolphins stayed a while, then disappeared into the blue, leaving only ripples behind. By afternoon, the boats reached a place known simply as the Deep Fold, a hidden spot where the water turned a darker blue, almost velvet. Here, the fish were larger, older, wiser. Thomas cast his line one last time, letting it sink slowly. Gold watched, ears perked. Then, a soft tug. Not fierce, not wild, just strong, steady. Together they pulled in a large fish, smooth, shining, with golden flecks along its back. It didn't thrash, it didn't fight. It seemed peaceful. Thomas looked into its eyes, and after a quiet moment, he gently returned it to the sea. Gold wagged his tail, understanding. Some things are better left free. As the sun began to lower, they turned their sails homeward. The boats moved in silent rhythm, like a flock of birds returning to roost. The light turned golden, then soft orange, then dusk. When the village lights came into view again, tiny lanterns glowing in the distance, everyone felt a quiet warmth in their hearts. Back on land, there were no shouts, no cheers, just nods, smiles, and full hearts. Thomas and Gold walked slowly back to their cottage. Inside, he lit a single candle, Gold curled up by the fire. And Thomas, wrapped in a soft blanket, looked out the window at the dark sea, now calm again, like it had never moved at all. He whispered to Gold, "The sea holds so much, and it always gives back something new." Gold let out a quiet sigh, already half asleep. Outside, the waves whispered. Inside, the fire glowed, and the stars blinked gently overhead, watching the world rest once more. The morning mist hovered gently above the sea. It moved slowly, like a veil being drawn back from a dream. The waves rolled in quietly, brushing the sand with soft white foam. In the distance, the sun rose through a thin cloud, turning the horizon into melted gold. Thomas, the kind-hearted fisherman, stood outside his small seaside cottage, mug of warm tea in hand. Gold, his golden retriever and constant companion, lay at his feet, eyes half closed, ears gently twitching with the wind. It was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that asks for noise, the kind of quiet that asks you to listen. Thomas looked down the path that led into the village. Today, someone was coming, an old friend. His name was Edwin, a painter who had once lived in the village many years ago. He and Thomas had spent long evenings by the sea as young men, watching the light change on the waves. Edwin had left to travel, to paint skies in different countries, mountains in other lands, but he had never stopped writing. And now, he was coming home. Just for a little while. Gold's ears perked up, footsteps, and then, around the bend in the path, came Edwin, taller now, with more gray in his beard, a large canvas bag slung over one shoulder, and a rolled-up easel in the other. They smiled without words and hugged. "It smells the same," Edwin said, looking at the sea. "Like salt and wood and memories." Thomas nodded. "Not much has changed, except you look like someone who's painted the wind itself." Edwin laughed. Gold sniffed Edwin's boots approvingly. And just like that, the day began. They spent the morning sitting outside the cottage, watching the sea breathe in and out. Thomas told quiet stories about the village, about young Eli, about Captain Josiah and Mira, about the dolphins they saw on the last trip beyond the horizon. Edwin listened, sketching small shapes into his journal, lines that curved like sails, smudges that hinted at waves. Then he said, "I want to paint you. Here. Just like this." Thomas chuckled. "I don't think I've changed much since you last did." "But that's what I like," Edwin replied. "You and Gold. You're part of this place. A stillness I need to capture." And so, he set up his canvas by the tall dune, where he could see the cottage, the fire pit, the old driftwood log where Thomas often sat. Gold laid down exactly where the sun hit the porch. Thomas sat beside him, holding his tea, looking out at the sea. And Edwin began. The afternoon passed slowly. The brush moved like a whisper over the canvas. Strokes of blue for the sky, dabs of gold for the dog. Earthy tones for the sand, the sea-worn boat, the soft folds of Thomas's sweater. The wind rustled gently through the dune grass. The waves kept their steady rhythm. Sometimes Edwin hummed as he painted. Sometimes he said nothing at all. And sometimes Thomas told old stories, of storms, of quiet birthdays, of a boy catching his first fish. Gold sighed and shifted in his sleep, chasing quiet dreams. As the sun began to lower, the light grew soft and amber. Edwin stepped back, brushing his fingers along the edge of the canvas. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he smiled. "It's not finished, but it's enough." Thomas walked over slowly, Gold following at his heels. The painting was full of light, not just from the sun, but from something deeper, something quieter, the kind of light that lives in stillness, in friendship, in moments that don't need to be remembered to be meaningful. Gold's eyes twinkled in the painting. Thomas looked out at the sea, just like he did every morning. "It feels like the truth," Thomas said softly. Edwin nodded. "It is." That evening, they lit a fire by the shore. They shared bread, cheese, and warm soup from a kettle. The moon rose behind the clouds, silver and kind. Edwin sat with his sketchbook on his knees, doodling the firelight. Thomas leaned back against a log, Gold curled by his feet. They said little. They didn't need to. The stars twinkled above like stories waiting to be told. And the sea whispered, always whispering. Later, before sleep, Edwin placed the canvas inside the cottage, leaned carefully against the wall. "I'll leave it here," he said. "It belongs to this place more than it belongs to me." Thomas smiled. "So do you." Edwin slept in the guest room, the sound of the sea like a lullaby through the open window. And as Gold let out one last soft sigh and the fire turned to glowing embers, Thomas looked at the stars and whispered, "Another good day." It began like any other morning. The sea murmured softly against the shore, and the first golden light spilled through the misty sky. A quiet breeze played with the grasses along the dunes, and gulls called lazily overhead. Thomas sat by his little cottage, warm tea in hand, his thoughts as still as the waves. Gold, his golden retriever, an ever-faithful friend, trotted down the path toward the beach like he did every day. Calm, purposeful, free. He always returned. By midday, he always returned. But today, he didn't. At first, Thomas didn't worry. Gold had his own rhythm. Sometimes he wandered by the tide pools. Sometimes he visited the dock where fishermen shared scraps. Sometimes he laid in the sun behind Mira's garden, dreaming among the rosemary. But as the sun climbed higher, then slowly dipped toward the west, Thomas began to wonder. He walked down the beach, calling softly, "Gold? Come on, boy." He checked the dock. He asked Mrs. Alden, who was sweeping her porch. He peeked behind the dunes and looked beneath the old cypress trees. Nothing. No sound of paw steps on sand. No glimmer of golden fur in the reeds. Only the sound of waves and wind. And silence. By late afternoon, a gentle worry curled around Thomas's chest. Not loud, not sharp, just a quiet ache. He returned home and sat on the porch. He poured 2 bowls of warm stew, one for himself and one he always shared with Gold. But Gold's bowl remained untouched. The sun began to set. The sky turned rose and lavender, then deeper, like velvet. And still, no sign. Thomas watched the horizon, holding his mug with both hands. He whispered, "Where have you gone, old friend?" Then, just as the moon began to rise, silver and round, a shape appeared at the edge of the path. Then 2, one familiar, one not. Gold trotted forward, tail wagging, eyes bright. Beside him walked another dog, slightly smaller, fur the color of driftwood, with soft ears and gentle eyes. The stranger stayed just behind Gold, unsure, careful, curious. Thomas set his mug down and stood slowly. "Well now," he said, "you've brought company." Gold wagged his tail harder, as if to say, "It's okay, I know." The new dog stayed still, looking at Thomas with wide, cautious eyes. Thomas knelt and extended his hand. "No hurry," he said softly. "Only kindness here." After a few moments, the driftwood-colored dog stepped forward and pressed her nose into his palm. Her fur was dusty. Her ribs were slightly visible. But her eyes, held both wonder and sadness, like someone who had traveled far and long. Thomas gently stroked her head. "You've had a day, haven't you?" Gold gave a soft huff and laid beside her. Thomas chuckled. "I suppose this is dinner for 3 then." He brought them both inside. The fire crackled softly, the room filled with the scent of warmth and stew. Gold ate with his usual contentment. The new dog, after a moment's hesitation, began to eat too. Slowly at first, then gratefully. Thomas didn't ask questions. He simply placed a blanket near the hearth. The stranger curled into it, tail tucked around her nose. Gold lay beside her, his head resting on her back. Outside, the waves rolled gently. Inside, everything was still. Thomas sat in his chair, rocking slowly, watching the 2 of them sleep. He didn't know where she came from. He didn't know how Gold had found her. But he knew this. Kindness had a way of coming back to you, sometimes in unexpected forms, sometimes on 4 legs, with tired paws and hopeful eyes. And Gold, well, he had always had a big heart. Thomas whispered into the soft quiet, "Thank you for bringing her home." Gold's tail flicked once in his sleep, and the sea outside the window seemed to sigh with peace. That night, under the soft gaze of the moon, 3 hearts rested gently by the fire. One old, one loyal, one new. And the world turned slowly, silently, wrapped in warmth, trust, and the quiet magic of an unexpected friendship. The morning began with a soft drizzle. Tiny raindrops tapped gently on the windows of the little seaside cottage. The sky was a pale gray, the kind of gray that made the world feel still, thoughtful, hushed. Thomas sat by the window with a warm cup of tea, watching the mist drift slowly over the waves. Gold, his golden retriever and lifelong friend, lay curled by the hearth, occasionally glancing toward the door, ears twitching with every sound. They weren't in a hurry. They never were. But that day, something new stirred in the village. 2 travelers had arrived the night before, tourists, yes, but quiet ones. A young couple from far away. Their names were Lena and Marcel. They had read about the village in an old guidebook, drawn not by landmarks or luxury, but by its silence, its space, its sky. That morning, they stood at Thomas's gate with gentle smiles and eyes full of curiosity. "Are you the fisherman?" Marcel asked softly, as if not to disturb the sea air. Thomas nodded. "I've been called that," Lena smiled. "We heard you take your boat out to the islands. We were wondering—" Thomas smiled before they finished. "Let's see what the day brings." Gold barked once, tail thumping on the wooden porch. And so, the plan was made. By late morning, the clouds had lifted. The sky opened into a soft blue, scattered with light clouds like brushstrokes. Thomas readied the boat, a sturdy little vessel with faded green paint and a wooden mast. Gold jumped in first, taking his usual place at the front like a captain with paws. Lena and Marcel followed, their cameras left behind, their eyes wide with wonder. They set off slowly. The water was calm. The breeze was kind. The village faded behind them. As they drifted farther, small islands began to appear, each one like a forgotten dream rising from the sea. Some were no larger than a garden, covered in wildflowers and seagull nests. Others had old stone ruins or solitary trees shaped by wind. Thomas didn't narrate much. He let the silence speak first. Only when Lena asked about an old lighthouse did he softly say, "No one's been inside for years, but the wind still rings through it on stormy nights." Gold barked once as if agreeing. They landed on one of the islands, a quiet stretch of sand surrounded by pine trees and smooth stones. The only sounds were the waves and the birds. They shared a small picnic under the trees, bread, cheese, apples, a thermos of sweet tea. Gold sat beside Lena, who gently stroked his head. "He feels like a poem," she whispered. Thomas smiled. "He is." Marcel wandered down to the rocks and found a shell shaped like a spiral. He held it to his ear. "I think I hear the sea telling a story." Thomas nodded slowly. "It tells different things to different people." The 4 of them sat quietly for a while, the sea stretching wide around them. No schedules, no noise, just being there. Later, they explored a second island, this one with tide pools full of tiny fish and star-shaped creatures. Gold trotted ahead, leading the way, careful not to step in the water. Lena laughed, her shoes in hand, walking barefoot across the warm stones. Marcel found driftwood and built a small sculpture, balancing piece upon piece, like a tower waiting for the wind. Thomas watched from the boat, humming a quiet tune his father had taught him. It was a tune meant for still days, for soft seas, for memories that hadn't happened yet. As the sun began its descent, they returned to the boat. The sky turned golden, then soft pink. The sea shimmered. Gold lay beside Lena's feet, tired but content. The wind picked up just enough to fill the sail, and they drifted back toward the village. No one spoke. No one needed to. It was the kind of silence that said everything. Back on the shore, as the first stars blinked above, Lena turned to Thomas. "Thank you for today." Thomas simply nodded. "The sea does most of the work." Marcel shook his hand. "You've given us something we didn't know we were looking for." Gold barked once, then pressed his head against Marcel's leg. As the couple walked back toward the inn, The wind carried the scent of pine and salt behind them. Thomas looked down at Gold. "Think they'll come back someday?" Gold wagged his tail once. That night by the fire, Thomas placed a small seashell on the windowsill, the same kind Marcel had found. Outside, the waves continued their slow song. Inside, everything was quiet. And in the hearts of those who had touched the sea, something gentle remained. Something shaped like water, sky, and kindness.